The Oregon Ducks are your Big Ten champions. The confetti fell in Indy last night after Dylan Gabriel led his Ducks to a 45-point explosion, and they needed every one of those points to beat Penn State. The Ducks finished the season as the only perfect team in FBS, the program's first ever 13-0 finish. Dan Lanning exercising some demons by winning a big one and conquering the conference in their first season in it. It's a good day for the Pac-12. In the SEC, the Dogs won it, but they may have lost their quarterback, Carson Beck, going down just before half. Kirby Smart calling it an upper extremity injury, but they don't know the extent of it. They're awaiting MRI results, which I'm sure will come after the bracket is released. Smart also saying he didn't have any grip strength, couldn't throw. Thank goodness we have a quarterback here at the desk, because that sounds like it's important for playing the position. But how does Beck's status affect this team in the postseason?
It's huge. We've obviously seen this season impacted by either his great play or, unfortunately, at times, his a little bit erratic play with the interceptions that came against Georgia, or excuse me, against Ole Miss when he got beat 28-10. But since then, I thought he had turned this corner, and he had 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions coming into the SEC championship game. I mean, there's a reason why he was projected to be a top pick in the NFL draft in the preseason, the raw natural ability. Also from a leadership standpoint, I go back to the loss, or excuse me, the win against Texas in Austin when Kirby Smart said, hey, this guy's got guts, and he had come off the 3 interception game. He's like, he's the type of leader that won't affect him, and he's still able to provide some stability at the position. So I do think it's massive. I do think there's a pretty big drop-off from Gunnar Stockton, too. We saw him relying on his legs a little bit more. It's interesting, because I did think if they had lost, the committee would have been a spot where there would have been a lot of questions about because of what happened last year with Florida State. But now that they're in, it doesn't matter. Like it's a moot point. So then it's from a competitive standpoint, can they pick it up? I will say, nothing surprising. This Georgia team is built to win in a lot of different ways. They've proven it time and time again. Their defense can rise to the occasion. Different players and ETN can rise to the occasion. And last night we saw Gunnar Stockton at times rise to the occasion. It's a championship mindset that Kirby has really built there in Athens, where I think it's significant. Like, I think their odds will drop, but I still think this is a team that's capable of winning a championship.
Real quick, some breaking news. Oregon is the #1 team in the bracket. Georgia is #2. I know our minds are blown right now, but we can go back to this conversation. How does the Carson Beck of it all affect this Dogs team moving forward?
I think because of how they've shown different ways to win a game, I think they actually belong at 2. If you told me he's out, I still think they belong at 2, only because they go into the locker room last night. They have been quadruply outgained in the first half by Texas. They are losing to Texas. They have to play the second half without their starter and rallied to beat Texas. It wasn't like they held on to a lead and had another half dozen sacks, bunch of tackles for loss, double-digit tackles for loss again. It's a roster that's loaded to reach their top-end potential like we saw them look like in the Tennessee game. Yes, they have to have Carson Beck, but that's not the world we live in. So here we go.
Like
look at this.
Boise State has gotten the 3 seed. We just had that debate. I'm sure, yeah, they're pretty happy in Boise, Idaho, but our friend Pete Prisco, probably not too happy. We loved that potential for them to play in the Fiesta Bowl and play a home game, but it looks like Boise will be playing in Arizona. Pate, what's your reaction?
Well, I just think if you see that and only that, I think that signifies what the committee thinks about strength of schedule, and you could probably well fill out the rest of this bracket accordingly.
They will continue to fill out the rest of this bracket, but we're going to head to break right now. Coming out on the other end, we'll react to what we see in the college football playoff bracket. Got some breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. We told you we'd bring you the bracket. The bracket is finally coming to us. We now know most of the seeds in terms of buys. We're still waiting for hosts, but Brandon Marcello is here joining us on the desk to react to some of it. We have a small picture of what we see this bracket so far. What's the biggest maybe surprise to you early on?
Nothing too shocking right now. It's almost going along the ways I thought it would go at this point, but we're still waiting to see about SMU. I do think it's a very good sign right now that they're going to end up being in over Alabama.
What do you think, Danny?
I think it's a lock. I mean, there's a lot of rumblings out there on social media, a lot of reporting on it, which I'm sure ESPN is not thrilled about, as they're supposed to own this thing. But we came in here from the get-go. If you look at the odds makers, FanDuel, that's a pretty sure thing if you have minus 1,000 odds.
So far, we have the hosts as Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame. There's one more host spot left. Who gets it, Pate?
I think that we will be, what are we looking at? 8 seed? Oh, Ohio State. Definitely Tennessee, Ohio State. I think the thing to watch as we move forward today is this is a structure-based playoff. Like, structure to me is the story of the day. We are already looking at a Clemson team that is 12th.
It is Ohio State.
There you go. They will host, I assume, Tennessee. We'll see about that. But it is a structure-based playoff. We have got first-round buys going to teams that were ranked, in reality, ranked what? I just wrote it down a second ago. Like, they're not in the top 4. Let me put it that way.
9 and 12.
9
so
and 12.
Boise is 9, Arizona State is 12.
Clemson is the number 12 team, but ranked number 16. So we are looking at a format that is deciding that playoff. This format was agreed upon by everyone, so I'm not saying it's unfair. I'm just saying I'm looking at sands in an hourglass rapidly ticking out of people in leveraged positions being happy with that format.
Who's the happiest team right now as it stands, Marcello?
I would say right now at this point, you've probably just got to think that the ACC is very happy.
Okay.
Because it looks like they're going to get 2 teams in. In fact, I don't think it's a stretch at this point to say they're going to. When we talk about draws and everything, I really like, at this point, Ohio State's draw, to be quite honest.
Okay.
Because there's a very potential here for them to get a rematch with Oregon in the second round in the quarterfinals.
Neutral site.
And it's a neutral site. And as we know, tight game in Eugene. We were there, Josh. And that was a tight game. Could have went any other way. Ohio State's going to be out for blood anyway, and you can bet they're really going to be after it if they can get past their first round game.
And we just saw Penn State with 2 100-plus yard rushers against Oregon. We saw Drew Aller able to throw the ball on Oregon. We have got probably the hungriest, most back-against-the-wall program in all of college football in Ohio State. Now, I know it sounds like we're overlooking Tennessee here. We're not. Yeah. We're talking about who's in position. And I'd argue as this bracket starts to fill itself out, this is going to be another format thing, talking point moving forward. If you strictly look at these first-round buys, if you strictly look at these second-round matchups, I don't think there is a more disadvantaged position than the 1 seed Oregon finds itself in. That doesn't mean that they couldn't go win the whole thing. We're talking about where you'd like to be. And where Oregon is they're going to draw either a Tennessee or an Ohio State, and either one of them are 2 of the best teams in the country.
What do you think about that? Disadvantage number 1 seed? Shouldn't they get all the advantage?
Yeah, I mean, if the favorites went out, you'd have Ohio State in that Rose Bowl, and then, you know, Texas or Clemson probably would be favored against Arizona State. Let's say it's Texas.
Right.
And you got to play Texas then in the semis. That is not an easy draw if there ever was one.
This is because of format. It is auto bid based. That is all we're talking about here.
So Indiana is in as the 10 seed to play Notre Dame as the 7th seed.
In state.
Winner plays Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, we project. Love it? Why do we love it?
I love it. In-state,
Yeah.
it's gonna be a fantastic atmosphere anyway, but in-state rivalry here, so to speak.
In South Bend.
And Notre Dame's just going to look down their nose to Indiana. It's going to be a great storyline.
I was hoping they would have had a Texas SMU similar matchup
Yes.
where it's big brother, little brother, you know, programs that are completely different historically in the sport. I was rooting for that one, but at least we get one of these will be phenomenal. I was in Indy this morning. Guy that checked my luggage was a big Indiana fan, and he's like, we want Notre Dame. They want that chance. Yeah.
Is anyone mildly surprised that SMU remained ranked ahead of Clemson?
No.
You're not. I was
I'm
mildly
not.
surprised by that.
I'm not. I think that at this point that I still had them 1 spot ahead of them at this point. And if you look at the computer rankings, and I know no one wants to mention that, the BCS rankings and everything, they have been pretty in line computer-wise with the committee over the years. And so going into today, that's why I kept thinking SMU was going to be above Clemson, even with that loss being as close as it was with the walk-off field goal. And it certainly looks like we're heading down that direction.
But the debate is still SMU over Alabama. Let's go around the desk and give our final thoughts. Pate, who's it going to be?
Oh, it's going to be SMU.
Okay, Marcella?
Yeah, SMU, definitely. I love the way they've played throughout the season.
I think it's going to be SMU. I think it should be SMU. Don't tell me about point spreads because I think Alabama probably would be favored and all that. And if they played, maybe they win 7 or 8 times out of 10. But I am more of the school of you have to earn it, and who deserves it. I think SMU, you have to.
We do not live in a hypothetical world.
Right. Although a lot of people want to live in one.
Hey, we're also about to see who the first 2 or 3 teams out were.
Yeah.
And I assume it's just going to be a conveyor belt of SEC teams. Yeah. And then we know what conversation that's going to breed.
All right, it is SMU gets in as the 11th seed. They'll play Penn State as the 6th seed in the first round. We have some breaking news, and it is the bracket. It has officially been filled out. We've been reacting to it piece by piece. But now that we have the whole thing, we need to react to SMU. All the guys at the desk called it here. It seemed like that is where it was going to be headed here. So we'll start with you, Pate. SMU is in. Is this the right decision from the committee?
Based on the committee's prior ranking, yes. Any argument that you were going to make about Alabama deserving to be above SMU was going to include other resume-based criteria, i.e. strength of schedule, i.e. wins against ranked opponents. All of that we already knew going into conference championship Saturday. The committee made it crystal clear in their rankings. They had SMU solidly above Alabama. Therefore, none of what we just talked about was going to factor into this. If SMU was even close last night, much less winning the game, if they were even close, you were going to have to stand behind what you said, which is we're not going to be punishing teams disproportionately because they play in their conference title game. So there's going to be a bunch of yelling and screaming from Alabama about this, and they may have valid points, but the validity of the points evaporated when the rankings were what they were last Tuesday night.
I think at this point, with the season now obviously concluded, we got to look at, we don't talk about top 25 wins anymore. Let's talk about wins against teams with winning records. Yeah. Or it's 500 or above right now. Alabama has 2 losses to teams that are 6-6. SMU has no such thing at this point, and they are playing so well. And you got to love the fight that we saw on display. Coming back from a 17-point deficit, they look like a playoff team. And I know every commissioner, coach out there is going to stump for their own little wheelhouse, their own little silo. But I love Dabo Swinney. One of the first things he said when he got off that field was SMU is a playoff team they deserve to be in.
Yep. And remember what Fran Brown said at Syracuse when he's like, here you go, Clemson. We just got your opportunity.
Pay it forward.
Yes, exactly. I love it. By the way, some of these point spreads are starting to come out in some of these games that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. What I have learned, though, and this is one thing that I cannot stand because I feel like this season more than ever there's been more parity on display, is people will say, well, if SMU played Alabama's schedule, they'd be 6-6 or they'd be 7-5. That drives me insane because anybody can beat anybody this season. It really is. I guarantee you they could beat Vanderbilt, they could beat Oklahoma, and maybe they could even beat some of the good teams that Alabama's beaten. I just hate the hypotheticals that you're talking about, which is why I try to really just distance it and say winning and losing matters more than ever because the talent has been spread out.
I'm glad you bring that up because SMU was supposed to play Vanderbilt this year. That series was canceled at the last minute. Also, the ACC really did the SMU Mustangs no favors when they developed their schedule to start off with, because guess who their first 2 ACC games were against?
One of them was Florida State. It was horrible.
The ACC champion Florida State and the runner-up Louisville on the road. You don't know what they're really going to look like. You didn't know they were going to expect to be Florida State. Sorry. As bad as they were this year.
But if they were good, it wouldn't have impacted their strength of schedule as much.
Exactly. So it isn't like SMU or the ACC were like trying to help SMU out or anything like that. I hate that argument, and also hate everybody saying schedule better than non-conference and all that. Goes, well, that's great, awesome, that's awesome. But Alabama lost 2 games on the road against teams with 6 losses at the end of the season, and SMU ran through their conference against teams that everybody thought were going to be top 10, top 15 worthy.
We weren't sure what the committee was going to do. It was this argument of bad losses versus good wins, because Alabama had those good wins, right? But SMU didn't have any bad losses. Alabama had 2 bad losses. So in the end, I think it's a consensus here. We believe that the committee did the right thing, putting SMU in over Alabama. Initial thoughts on this matchup with Penn State? They got to celebrate the fact that they got in, but they have a tough road ahead of them with Penn State. You just saw them in person, Danny. What's going to cause them problems SMU against
the
Penn State?
physicality. I mean, that's the difference. But I'll tell you what, Rhett Lashlee has done a pretty good job. I thought the physicality of bumping up from the American to the ACC would be a challenge, and they were more than up to it by going all the way to the championship game. The physicality being to slow down Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and being able to deal with Abdul Carter on the other side of the ball. I'm waiting for that point spread because I think it'll probably be double digits, right? Most likely.
Which one?
Penn State, SMU.
9, I think, was what I looked at last week.
Yeah,
It'd be
so
above a
somewhere
touchdown.
in there. But again, like, this is a team, they couldn't run it last night. They were able to come back. Like, Kevin Jennings is a problem.
Yes.
And they don't have, like, a singular wide receiver like a Tez Johnson for Oregon, but they have a bunch of guys. They roll pretty deep at the wideout position. They love to get yards after catch, and good luck trying to contain Kevin Jennings. So I think it's going to be a handful for Penn State. Clearly, you know, where they play is going to matter. I don't know if they're going to declare it a whiteout or not, but at the Big Ten championship game last night, it felt like a whiteout. I mean, Penn State they'll be absolutely bonkers. It's going to be a tough atmosphere, cold. There will be some conditions, but I think it's a fun matchup. All these, I think, are fun.
Yeah, we will continue to react to all of these matchups because we officially have a bracket. And coming up after the break, we'll talk about Oregon's path to a national championship. Favorable? Not? We'll discuss. After 4 months of college football, we officially have our hands on the bracket. Oregon is your #1 team. Georgia, Boise State, Arizona State will all be waiting their fate after the first round of the playoff. But a first round game that we've got our eyes on, Penn State and SMU. We discussed extensively what this meant for SMU to get in the bracket. But Josh Pate believes for Penn State, there's a lot of pressure to go ahead and win this thing.
It's an immense pressure spot. The format's pathetic, so the criteria is pathetic. The committee can't help that. They are told what the format is, but since you have an auto-buy process in the format, you end up semi-penalizing your Big Ten championship game winner in Oregon, which we'll get to in a second. But Penn State is in the most advantaged position out of anyone who made this playoff. We're getting numbers out right now. They're going to host a team from Dallas in 15-degree weather. They'll be over a touchdown favorite against SMU. They would then, if they won that, go on to play a Boise State team. Both of these teams they out-roster, by the way. They would go on to face the Boise team that got the first round bye. Guess which team would be favored by nearly 2 touchdowns there? Because it's not the team with the first round bye. Penn State has got a water slide in front of them into the semifinals, basically. And I think about the pressure on James Franklin because for so long it's been, you can't win the big game, you can't win the big game. Okay, well, they competed in the big game against Oregon yesterday. They came up short, but now they're in a position where they're in the playoff anyway. It's expanded, that's why they're in, but they're in the playoff. How could you, if you made the playoff bracket for yourself and you were Penn State, how would you set it up any differently than it is right now?
I think here's the other thing. I think Penn State went into the Big Ten championship game almost with some pressure off of them for the first time.
I agree.
Because they backed into it. We didn't know we were going to be here. Only thing we can do is really improve our seeding at this point and maybe win a Big Ten title while doing it. That's why I think they played a little bit looser, were able to stay in that game the way they did. Now the pressure's back on because now the big games are here. And oh, by the way, you're expected to win your next 2 playoff games.
And one more thing, just if we're looking at this region, if we want to call it that, by far the biggest shark fin there is Georgia. We don't know what Georgia's status is at quarterback. If you take a Carson Beckless Georgia and then you look at the rest of that region, what would normally be a hurdle too high for Penn State to clear is not there. And so we're talking about a path all the way clear through, maybe even to the national championship game before you face a legit situation where you go, nah, Penn State can't get that done.
I hate to ask this, but it's looking way too far ahead. But if we were to put odds on a Penn State-Georgia matchup, who is the favorite there, and what does that spread look like?
Without Carson Beck on a neutral site, that would be under 5 points. I think you're looking at Georgia. We saw Oregon last night on a neutral field, only a little over a field goal favorite. And I would imagine odds makers view a Georgia team lesser than an Oregon team. I think it'd be a really tight spread.
Conversely, when we look at Oregon as the #1 seed, you assume that they should have the most favorable path. But when we were discussing this in real time, the guys on here do not believe that, and that Oregon has one of the toughest roads. And this is something that we've discussed all season long, really. There's no elite teams. You said it earlier in the show. There's just a bunch of great teams that are in this bracket right now. Oregon or the field in this case?
Oh, I would take the field just because of the way the season has gone. And I am somebody who picked Oregon in the preseason to win the national championship. And I think they're the best team in the country. And if you had, if I could only take one, I would take Oregon. But there's just too much chaos this season. And it's hard. We've talked a lot about this. Hard to beat a team twice. If Ohio State does beat Tennessee, you know what their mindset is coming out there. By the way, I love that matchup will be played in the Rose Bowl. So you got kind of an old school Pac-12, Big Ten type of matchup there. So yeah, it's definitely, this is one of the things that will be addressed too. I think for the reasons we're talking about, and also because you have a Boise State there at a 3 seed, that's why I don't think this system comes, it will look nothing like this in 2 years.
I just want to raise my hand because I want to make sure we don't do the thing that will be done. What will happen is, if we get to that game, let's just say it's a Penn State versus Boise, and let's say it goes to overtime. Let's say Boise even wins the game. It doesn't change the point that's being made here.
Right.
It's kind of like in the past when, like, Alabama gets in the playoff last year. You're judging them on their body of work. Whether they beat Michigan by 30 or lose by 30, the decision was the decision. It was right or wrong before the game was played. Our point, whether you agree with it or not, about the format and how flawed it is right or wrong, independent of what this Boise team does, because I haven't heard you say, or me, say that we don't think Boise's good.
Right.
What we've said is the dynamics of strength of schedule in this sport are such that there is a minimum baseline that should be required from your strength of schedule for you to earn something like a first-round bye in a playoff, and there's no way you can meet that playing a Mountain West schedule.
The simplest way to fix this is you give the top 5 whatever conference champions a spot in the playoff, and we reseed it on Sunday.
I'll promise not to say that as long as you promise if we see a blowout. Say, see, we didn't need 12 teams. All right, so
it's got to work both ways here.
Okay?
I love it. We're reacting to the bracket. Brandon Marcello is fixing the bracket. But coming up next, we'll talk to the head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers, Curt Cignetti, joining us live. We are continuing to react to the college football playoff bracket here on CBS Sports HQ, and we want to zero in on the Hoosier State. You've got Indiana and Notre Dame battling it out. That will be the first game of the college football playoff Friday night at 8 o'clock. I know our guys here at the desk are continuing to look at this line movement here, but Danny, I'll ask you straight up, who wins the game?
Oh, wow. Yeah, just put me right on the spot.
What do you think about this matchup?
I kind of like Indiana as the trendy underdog pick in this one.
Ooh,
now, this one, I have been calling out Notre Dame all season long. It bothers me that they get a complete pass and they're able to manipulate the system. The only one that doesn't play in a concert, in a conference, and yet they can get a home game, not subject themselves to that conference championship weekend. I also think Indiana's a really good football team. I do. I mean, they're complete. I know the game against Ohio State, a lot of people said, see, they can't compete, they can't compete. I thought their defense did a pretty good job against Ohio State's offense, and I think they were close in a couple spots to hitting a couple big plays where maybe that outcome comes differently, and I don't think Notre Dame is the same caliber as Ohio State.
So it depends on how you view Indiana as a quality of team as to how you view this entire part of the bracket, because we were just talking about Penn State a little while ago. But you could just as easily, if you really believe Indiana's about to peak at the right time, you could say 7.5-point dog. They've done it before this year. They could go into South Bend and win. Then it would be them against maybe a hobbled Georgia on a neutral field in round 2. So they're in that same sort of region that Penn State is. How about that, though? We got half of what we wanted. We wanted SMU, Texas, and we wanted Indiana, Notre Dame. We at least got Indiana, Notre Dame. That's the first game in the playoff. That's standalone on a Friday night. Mark your calendars. 8 o'clock up there. I project, let's go over under 13.5 degrees at kickoff. And
feels like
feels like
when I got off the plane in Indianapolis on Thursday night, it was 11.
Yeah, and that's 3 weeks before.
Right, I think December 1st or 21st is like the first day of winter, right? Like that's when it's going to be coming. It's going to be cold.
Look, there is another question always with teams that haven't been there before. When there's an extended layoff, do they find the next gear? The teams like Georgia that are there every year, it's just rinse and repeat. They just dust off the blueprint. Well, they don't have that in Indiana. They haven't been here. And they're not alone in this conversation. Someone just, like, they strike it every time. Someone just makes you look and say, why don't we just do it the way they did it, man? They played their best ball at the right time.
I have an expert standing by on this matchup. We have the head coach of Indiana, Curt Cignetti, joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. And Coach, I know you were very vocal yesterday about believing that your team deserves a home game. You don't have to go far for this game necessarily, but what's your reaction to hitting the road for the first round of the playoffs?
Well, you know, it's a great thing. I had to carry the flag for my team. That's my job. That's all old news now. So we know who we're going to play, when we're going to play, and where we're going to play. And we're excited about it. Going to be playing a good football team, very well coached. It's won 10 games in a row. And we're a good football team, too. And I think the big thing for us, you know, the lessons we learned when we went to Ohio State on the road with the crowd noise, and how we responded. It's important we apply that to our next road game, and I'm confident that we will.
Coach, how did you find out? Did your team watch all together? Did you find out a little bit ahead of time? Was it find out live like everybody else? And what was the reaction from the team? What has it been?
Yeah, no, we expected to be here. We didn't have the team together. We knew we were going to be in this playoff, and it's business. And so where are they right now? I don't know where they are. They'll be tomorrow at 5 o'clock, for our team meeting. And quite frankly, today in the new college football world, the staff will spend half its time today evaluating portal guys and half its time guys on their own taking a peek at Notre Dame, and we'll start up on them tomorrow.
Coach, we've seen in the past, even in a condensed playoff, a 14 playoff, even back in the BCS era, a team would make it there for the first time. They'd go through the process, and then sometimes you would hear coaches come out on the other side months later and say, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I would have known to do that. I wish I would have structured practices a little bit differently. A lot of your guys are there for the first time. How do you best equip your program to dial in as best you can in this lead up, in this prep?
It's a piece of cake. I'm used to being in the playoffs, used to advancing in the playoffs. We're going to stay true to the process. Next week is like you have an open week, and then you're in game week. So, you got to win to move on.
Coach, you mentioned you learned a lot about going on the road, playing at the Shoe at Ohio State. But the week before, you guys played Michigan and got that big win against a team that a lot of people said would be your biggest challenge. I mean, every game as it's gotten incrementally more challenging, that's been the case. You guys have always risen to the occasion. What have you learned about your team in those last kind of games that you'll have to apply to Notre Dame, who's another one of these teams that will be power rated? They'll be favored against you guys. They'll have the bigger players, on paper. What have you learned that you guys can do against a program like that?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying this. I'm going to give Michigan a lot of credit first. We should have been up in that game at halftime by 3 or 4 scores. We were up by 14 points. They came out in the second half and played at another level, particularly on defense. And they carried that on to their next home game against Northwestern and then against Ohio State. All right? So we went to Ohio State. We didn't play like we wanted to play. I like the way we responded against Purdue. And I think, once again, we learned some lessons there, particularly with crowd noise. And our punt team gave them 14 points, right? We're up 7-0 a quarter and a half into the game. With 1:38 to go in the game, it's 7-7. We're punting, and we dropped the snap. And, and then the first series of the second half, we're punting. Punt's supposed to go right, it goes left, and our coverage is right, and the punt's left, and they return for a touchdown. Still got to get the guy on the ground. So those are things that were uncharacteristic of us. We got to play our game and play like we've played all year long. I'm confident in my team. We're playing a good opponent. It'll be a good game.
Coach, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on getting in, and best of luck going forward.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you to the head coach of Indiana, Curt Cignetti, for joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. Sure, they might not have been in the playoffs before, but they have won a lot of football games. 11-1 they finished this season. An absolutely historic year for Indiana. Well, we're going to hit a break here on our college football playoff bracket reaction. There is still so much to talk about, so we'll talk about Penn State's path next. Take another look at the final 12-team college football playoff bracket. We finally have our hands on it. Now we're going to do our best to fill it out and say what we believe is going to happen, starting with the game at 4 o'clock Eastern, December 21st on Saturday. Clemson versus Texas, the 12-5 game for the right to play Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. Danny, who you got?
We made a lot about top 25 wins. Do you know how many top 25 wins Texas has against current top 25? It is a big fat 0. I'm going to go with the upset. I think there is something about Clemson.
Upset in the first game. I love it.
I'm telling you,
Look at this aura. Look at the aura.
Dabo Swinney's already called his shot. He said we were the first team to run the table in the 4-team playoff. We'll be the first one to win a title with 3 losses in this one. They are playing with house money. They are so loose. I thought their defense, I think, can stack up well against Texas. Cade Klubnik has been playing a lot more confidence. I think Clemson can pull off the upset.
Do you have any idea how high the off-the-rails potential is here. You got Dabo on the same field as Matthew McConaughey. You've got them as an underdog, which is like oxygen to Clemson and Dabo Swinney. And you've got a Texas team that went into this Georgia game yesterday with the lead against the opponent's backup, having quadruply outgained Georgia in the first half, somehow found the way not to win that game. There's this click that's missing with Texas's offense. And if that's the case again, and Clemson hits a few explosive plays, that's what it takes to win. I'm telling you, someone just needs to pretend like Clemson's favored. Because if you send them into Austin and you tell them it's you against the world, we've seen that movie. We've seen that movie play out too many times. Having said that, Texas is going to win that game.
Okay, I was going to say, did you hear it, Vic? I didn't hear that.
Texas is
going to. Okay, so we're already split on the first game. That's what makes this so exciting. Again, this game is at Texas. They're currently 11.5-point favorites, and it's the first meeting between these two teams ever. Let's continue to move down in the bracket. We've got Tennessee at Ohio State. We'll start with you on this one. Who wins the game, Pate?
Look, I stood boldly and proudly on a mountaintop in August and said, this is the year that Ryan Day just rids himself of the fog. And it's not been a great December. It's been a long December. But I still look at the way that this lays out, and I can't quit them.
Okay.
Some of their own fans have quit them, but I cannot quit them. So that's a little tease for where I think the bracket's going. Earmuffs, I'm going to take Ohio State to beat Tennessee, and that would send them to not a Big Ten championship game rematch, but a week 4, week 5, whatever it was, rematch. And we're looking at it right now in living color, only this wouldn't be in Autzen Stadium where they lost by 1 point. This would be at a neutral site, somewhere in a sterilized NFL environment. Yeah. Well, actually, never mind. I take that back. I've got extreme deference for the Rose Bowl. So any other neutral site,
Okay,
yeah, I'll hate on it. The Rose Bowl, I love it. Every time I go, I try to rip up some sod and take home with me.
I so bad want to call another upset for you, Emily, for your balls.
Please do it, Danny.
And it depends on what version of Nico do you get. Like, if he gets hot and plays like he did down the stretch, well, that too. I also think their defense could travel. Here's the thing I will say about it. I'll make the pick for Ohio State, but my goodness, they better get off to a strong start, because we could have a playoff game, a home playoff game, where you're supposed to have the home field advantage, where if you get 2 3-and-outs or you get a Will Howard interception, they'll be booing. And they'll be booing Ryan Day. They'll be booing the Buckeyes. And that is not the healthiest environment to get to, because that stress starts to build. And then you're the opponent. You're on the road. You're like, oh, these guys are getting booed by their own fans. Then all of a sudden, usually your confidence starts to build. I think they overcome it. I still think they're a dangerous team. So I'll stick with Ohio State. But I think I kind of like Tennessee with the points.
I almost wonder, now that you say that, and you're right about that, there's no more toxic feeling place when things go bad than a high expectation Ohio State crowd that is let down. There is a world where if I'm Ohio State, I would rather get out of there and go on the road. I don't know if Neyland's the place I want to go, but there is a world where I'd say, just get me out of here, man. Columbus, Ohio is not where I want to be right now. Next time I show up here, I want to have a championship trophy in my hand. If they lose that game, having lost the Michigan game, I don't know how you avoid the conversation about Ryan Day just like going off the rails. And at that point, someone like me sits there, I try and be pragmatic about it. I try and be reasonable about it. There will be no room in the room for that if they lose at home, because this is what happens now. You lose the Michigan game, it used to be your season was over. You just skip over Indy and you get a home playoff game now. If you drop the ball on that too as a touchdown plus favorite, God be with you.
Yeah, for Ohio State fans, it felt like the season was over, but as a reminder, it obviously is not over. They still could have plenty of football left to play. Speaking of Big Ten head coaches who have a little bit of pressure on them, let's go to our next game with SMU at Penn State. We discussed this earlier on in the show. Josh Pate believes that there's a lot of pressure on James Franklin to maybe run the table and get there to the national championship, but first they got to go through the ponies here.
Yeah, let's just make sure we understand there's pressure on everybody because it's high-level college football, but it's disproportionate on teams like this in spots like this, because for a long time Penn State's been pretty good to really good. There hasn't been greatness there. I always scoff when people call James Franklin and Penn State overrated, because they're not overrated. They're properly rated. No one thinks they're elite. People think they're pretty good. They're always in the 5 to 10 range. Well, that now lands you a playoff, and it lands you a home game. And just because the format is as whacked out as it is, you get SMU sent to you. And you are in a position where you outman them, you should beat them. And you played Oregon really hard last night as we're talking. It's Sunday. I'm going to pick Penn State here. There's this weird part of me, Danny, that watched them lose last night. And I, in some weird way, am more confident about them than I would be if they won a 13-9 game where Oregon was -3 turnovers. Like in that scenario, they would have won the Big Ten title. But I wouldn't think any differently about Penn State. Last night, they were forced to play catch-up. Drew Aller's forced to throw the ball. They have 2 100-plus yard rushers. Dylan Gabriel got the better of them. There aren't many Dylan Gabriels out there. All due respect to even SMU, they don't have a Dylan Gabriel. So I like Penn State in this spot, and I like them to maybe build up momentum and maximize on this new format.
Team from Texas going up to play in Pennsylvania. Cold weather is going to come into play. I think Penn State is built to win multiple ways. If you have to rely on Kevin Jennings to do a little bit more through the air, which I think they will, I think they'll be able to stop Brashard Smith, the running back for SMU. I think that could be too much to overcome. I am very curious to see what Rhett Lashlee does, what game plan he does up. He usually finds a way to put up offense on most teams, but I think Penn State will overwhelm them at home.
While we're talking about road environments, Penn State has been dying to do a night game whiteout, and they get the noon kick on Saturday. What do you think about that, Danny?
James Franklin always handles this the right way.
Yeah.
I mean, even their last game.
Yeah, you can't complain.
Yeah, it is a playoff game. It is at home. I think all of us wish it was at night. They'll be loud. They'll get it going. It's just not the same. You don't have as much time to get lubricated.
Yeah.
It's graduation week up there. There's some weird scheduling dynamics going on at
That's
Penn
a good
State.
thing, right? That'll make it even better, don't you think? Because it could be an empty campus if kind of classes are out.
Better than like the fall break game, the winter break game, as long as they're still on campus.
One of a million talking points here is home playoff games. Okay, how's your grounds crew get ready? And are your students even still on campus? Like, how's your gate going to look?
Yeah, well, let's hope the Rose Bowl's working on their grounds crew. Sounds like somebody's stealing turf from it. So we got one more game we want to discuss in the first round. Indiana at Notre Dame. We just spoke with the head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers, and Curt Cignetti, and he was so focused on just getting ready to play this Notre Dame game, but he's not here anymore, Danny.
No.
I don't know if he's still watching. I hope he's still watching, Coach. Who wins this game?
The minute we got off air with him, I was trying to open up my FanDuel app to see what the line was, maybe make a play on him.
Yeah.
I like Indiana.
Okay.
There's going to be upsets. That's what I keep going. I do not think chalk is going to win out. I'll take the Hoosiers to beat Notre Dame in South Bend. I know Notre Dame, we were talking earlier about who have they beaten. That Texas A&M win, which feels like it was 8 years ago, the first week of the season. I still don't think Texas A&M was that good of a team, and that was with Connor Wigman before they had Marcel Reed. It's a good win, and then where's the next one? Is it Army and Navy? Just because they were top 25, we've talked about the Group of 5 being a different level of competition. Those wins don't resonate as much with me. I'm going to go with Indiana. And the one thing that Curt Cignetti that I forgot about was the 14 points they gifted them in the special teams. You know, and that was big, or else that game could have been an ugly defensive scoring affair. And again, I like teams that have multiple ways they can win. They've shown they can win in shootouts. Their Curtis Warwick and company can get it going, and they can put up big points, or their defense is stout enough. And I'm not sold on Riley Leonard as a passer just yet. I think this will be a lower scoring game. I think Indiana can get it done.
Interested to see the total in this game. It's the game I feel the least confident about if I look across the first round. You're right, though. Inevitably, in a season like this, where there are no elite teams, we'll have upsets. Problem is trying to peg it. So I think a lot of people will hone in on this one, and then Clemson pops Texas out of nowhere and Notre Dame wins by 14. I'm just going to go roster here. I'm going to go Notre Dame. I also think a lot of what I could get in terms of explosivity from Indiana may be neutralized by weather, because you can talk as much as you want to about the fact that we're from Bloomington. You haven't played in this. Like, no one really plays in this all that much. I just think the lean factor in the second half, we're already breaking down halves. I think the lean factor is a little bit too much. I take Notre Dame.
So no upsets for you in this first round.
Here's the problem.
You picked two. You picked none.
There will be upsets.
Chalk State.
I know I would rather go 2-2 than 0-4. Trying to find these upsets. That's what I'd rather do. Okay, well, hopefully we'll get a good look of your bracket here coming up in just a little bit. These guys are working on their brackets. We'll show them to you. Stay with us. More HQ on the other side. We're continuing to react to the college football playoff bracket. Our friends at Sportsline have run their simulations. This is their optimal outcome. We've got chalk. Totally. In the first round, all the favorites winning. But look at the national champion. They've got Penn State playing against Texas, and Texas wins the whole thing. So a 5 and a 6 seed, that's what we love to see. A little bit of upset there. But we're going to toss things over to Josh Pate, who walks us through his optimal bracket. Yeah, I got to wonder if Sportsline knows something about Carson Beck there.
Right.
Be very interested in that. Look, the one thing I hate in life is being nailed down. I don't ever want to give definitive statements because that means I have to back them up. But let's go.
Sharpie.
Why not?
Come
Everyone,
on, you've had all of 40 minutes to prep. Come on.
everyone at home, get your pencils out, not your pens. I want you to write this down lightly. Clemson plays Texas the first day of winter there in Austin. 4 o'clock kickoff. That's 3 o'clock local time. I still think somewhere in my heart of hearts there is a version of Texas that we're going to get. Maybe Sark's just got a Kirby problem, and that's why we didn't say it yesterday. Maybe they just match up against Georgia bad. Maybe they'll never have to see Georgia in the playoff. They will see Clemson. Still think it's a flawed Clemson team. Good for them. I still think it's a flawed Clemson team. I will take Texas to win that game and advance to play Arizona State. And you want to talk about playing two teams right out of the gate that have nothing to lose. I'm just saying. All right, Tennessee against Ohio State in Columbus. That is an 8 p.m. kickoff. That is, I think, the last of the first-round games in terms of chronological order. This is the game that's been locked in for a while. We've all known that this game was going to happen one way or the other for a while. I feel the same way about Ohio State I do about Texas, Danny. I still think there's a version of them. And I also think in terms of just pure back against the wall mentality, you've got all the pressure that's built up, but it's not Michigan. As long as it's not Michigan across the field, I can count on Ohio State. I think they played maybe their best game of the year against Indiana, high leverage spot, and then the other best game of the year was against Oregon. They lost the game, but they played. If I get that level of play from Ohio State in this game, they will win and they will advance. SMU going to Penn State. Talked about it a million times. Let's make it 1,000,001. Penn State, out of all of the teams, relatively speaking, in this tournament, is the most privileged, advantaged position that there is, but you still got to go win the game. That doesn't mean I disrespect Rhett Lashlee and SMU, but if I'm looking at all the possibilities in round one, that right there is who I want. They can put it in any hype video in Dallas they want. I love those guys. They probably will.
Sure, they're flipping it right now.
This is your spot to make it happen. If you're James Franklin in Penn State, you got Ohio State up there. You didn't get it done. Competitive game. You go to the Big Ten and you play Oregon. You don't get it done. Competitive game. Both of the calibers of those teams are greater than the one you'll play at home here. So I think Penn State wins that game and advances. And then the old in-state rival, we're going to talk about it like it's a high school 4A football state championship. Indiana, plucky. You'll use all the adjectives about Indiana. I just look at manpower. I look at size. I look at strength. I look at physicality. I almost like that Notre Dame doesn't need fireworks to win. I almost like that they are more of a bulldozer because I think that stuff translates to this time of year. So I'll take Notre Dame over Indiana. Then we start looking at that next round. This is where I start to weigh my relationships. I have to start making some tough decisions, really my relationship with
Relationships
sanity.
with who? That's what I was going to say.
Myself.
Sanity.
The man in the mirror, yeah. Okay,
So what's he telling you?
Texas, the same thing that I just said to advance them in round one, I'm advancing them in round two. Having said that, I am thinking about Arizona State with time to prepare. I'm thinking about Cam Scatterbo. I'm thinking about just the total DGAFity, the DGAF-ness of that program, if you will.
I haven't heard
this
that
is
word.
the internet, so we can roll that way.
Go ahead.
I'm going to take Texas. I'm terrified. I want you to hear me in Tempe. Absolutely terrified of that pick. Ohio State against Oregon in the Rose Bowl is just, it's a postcard.
Yeah.
It's everything that's right about college football, even in the most flawed of formats. It's everything that's right. I think that if Ohio State can start off fast and win that first game against Tennessee, which I project them to do, I think we are going to see some team out there that is actually a little flat because they had the time off. I'm just going to randomly guess this is that spot. And also, it's a revenge spot for Ohio State on a neutral field. Penn State, Boise. Penn State, we think, will be favored by between 11 and 14 points. I think that's right. And the thing about Boise, everyone gets scared of like the shock the world upset potential because that program's famous for it. It's Ashton Genty. Like, that's it. And if you can stop it, fine. And if you can't, that's tough luck. I think Penn State can do a good enough job limiting them. I think they win that game. And then I look at Notre Dame, Georgia, and million-dollar question, multi-million-dollar question. I think if you asked our friends at FanDuel over there about the handle they'll have on this game, what do we know about Carson Beck? If we don't have them, or if we don't have him, it's not the end of the world for Georgia. Gunnar Stockton and company came from behind, riding a dominant defensive performance to win last night against Texas. But I think if Notre Dame's already got a win under their belt and they start rolling, it's a great spot for Notre Dame. So I'm going Carson Beck-less. Let me specify. I'm thinking Georgia's got quarterback issues.
Your pick would change.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. So I am going to, with a caveat, pick Notre Dame to advance. Texas, versus Ohio State in the semifinal. In fact, these are two big money games in the semifinals. Oh, buddy. So I think about what cost Texas twice against Georgia. And I think personnel-wise, out of this entire bracket, the next program that is capable of doing that from a personnel standpoint is Ohio State. I think they could put something similar in front of Texas. I think Ohio State edges them in that game. And I think that if you look down at the bottom, if Penn State has won already against Boise, and then they get into this game against Notre Dame, I think they beat Notre Dame. Wow. And I think we're looking at an all Big Ten national championship game. It's a replay of what we saw in State College earlier this year. It is in Atlanta. And how about Greg Sankey in the SEC watching two Big Ten teams do battle in their mecca? Atlanta is the mecca of the SEC. I mean, you're talking about putting a wooden spoon in your mouth and biting as hard as you can for SEC folks having to see that. I got Ohio State winning the whole thing.
Ohio State is Josh Pate's pick to win.
And I'll tell you, it's because they look so good against Michigan. I love what they've showed against Michigan.
Okay, that's what it is. Danny, where's your biggest qualm here? Do you have any? Is it perfect?
Oh yeah, no, I have a bunch of different picks in it. Like but I could see it. You know, that's the thing. I could see all of it unfolding.
Yeah, don't call any pick stupid in this whole thing.
Exactly. Ohio State, there is such a thing as, and now this is not the way we talk about good losses, but there are motivating losses. Ones that kind of wake you up, that get you behind together. I think Ohio State could have it's us against the world, which is completely opposite of what we came into this season. Remember, they had the super team, everybody's favorite, everybody loves them. They have all the superstar talent, and they've fallen well short of expectations. Now they can use all this negativity as motivation for them. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. That talent is still there.
You remember 2 years ago, they lost to Michigan at home.
Yep.
And then they had to regroup because they made the playoffs.
Yep.
And they go to Atlanta to play Georgia. And I thought they played game of the year. They end up missing a field goal to win the thing. But we saw Ryan Day get probably the best performance of the year out of his team after they had already lost to Michigan. So they could have gone in a hole, but instead they didn't. So we've got precedent here. And if he does that again, if that program does that again, they could be shot out of a cannon and win this whole thing.
The problem I would have it, so you had the two Big Ten teams in the national championship, but you don't have the best one in. That would be my problem with it. Because I would have Oregon. That's who my national champion pick is.
But Oregon's got to beat Ohio State to get there. That's
yeah, but I think we already saw it happen once, you know, and we've seen them. I think Oregon is the most complete team in college football as far as a roster standpoint. Like, everybody's had quarterback play. It's been a little bit up and down. Or can we get a little bit more out of Drew Aller? Or Quinn Ewers, is he healthy? And do we need to bring in Arch Manning? Like, all of these teams, you go and there's a little bit of flaws. There may be a flaw in the defense. Oregon does not have a weakness. And they have a coach who I think is going to finish the season and be it's going to be a coronation for Dan Lanning as a top 3, top 5 coach in all of college football, because he's been on that trajectory ever since his name has started becoming rumblings, and he's been a coordinator in the SEC, and he goes out as this young, hot coach at Oregon. He has lived up to those expectations. He's a great motivator. He's great with X's and O's. He's done genius things with the rule book that we never even thought possible when he put 12 men on the field to get that extra seconds off the clock against Ohio State. I think it's a party for Oregon at the end of the year.
When I hear you say that Ohio State can go into this playoff with the us against the world mentality, man, that has rumblings of Michigan, for Michigan versus everybody else and what they did last year. It worked for them, but man, Ohio State's do not like the fact that I just compared them to Michigan's national championship run last year.
You know what's wild is we've been laying all this out, and I've been participating. Not hardly a mention of Tennessee.
No.
Hardly no mention of Tennessee.
And I kind of wanted to pull the trigger and to call the upset in round 1.
But you didn't.
But that's more so just for my sanity. Hey, if you want more from Josh Pate, check out Josh Pate's College Football Show Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Yeah, it is Sunday, which means there's a show coming tonight you're going to want to check out. Hey, SMU, they're in. And coming up next, we'll talk to the head coach of the Mustangs, Rhett Lashlee, joining the program. Stay with us. The major question mark here on Selection Sunday was, would the Mustangs be in the postseason? Answer, yes. SMU earning that final spot in the college football playoff bracket. The decision seemingly went down to SMU versus Alabama. After competing in the ACC championship last night, it is the Mustangs who are into the college football playoff. And here to talk more about it is the head coach of SMU, Rhett Lashlee. Coach, we're so excited that you're here. First off, congratulations. You are officially in. I'm sure it was a bit of a sweaty night for you waiting that decision. Why was this the right decision to put your team in the college football playoff?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I mean, it was a long 10 or 11 hours since that last kick went through waiting for this morning. You know, Brandon knows me well, and I was texting furiously just trying to figure out what was going on. But, you know, I think it's the right decision because of things that matter. I mean, there's so many metrics. I saw your deal up there. We're 0-2 versus ranked teams by the committee. We also beat teams when they were ranked, and I don't think ranked teams should be a metric. It's not a metric in the college football deal. You know, we need an FPI, a net ranking, a quad 1-2, something that's a little more objective that we can rank that stuff on. And for our team, I think the consistency of performance, you go 8-0 in one of the top 3 leagues in America, winning by an average of 19 points. We're 10 Power 4 games. We lost 2 of them to 10-win teams by 3 each. You know, we didn't ever have a bad loss. Good teams beat the teams they're supposed to beat and compete in the big games. And we were able to do that. And so, you know, we had a bad first quarter last night. And it cost us in the end, but I think the championship medal and character our team showed in the second half and in the fourth quarter shows what we're capable of in this playoff.
Rhett, congratulations first off. I wanted to ask you, looking back, way back to that BYU game, how different is your SMU team now compared to what we saw back then?
You know, obviously the makeup's not a whole lot different. I mean, but I think we're different for 2 reasons. One, we have a lot of confidence because, you know, we had just, until last night, lost it September 6th, and we got on a roll there. But I think our team just has an identity. You know, we have the same players, but with Kevin at quarterback, our offense found an identity, and it calmed everything down for our football team. We always had a good defense. Our defense played great in the loss to BYU. Our defense played well last night. I mean, we got after Clemson, but in the first quarter, we gave them 4 short fields and put them in a bind. So I think our defense was always consistent, but they gained a lot of confidence when, you know, Kevin and our offense was able to get going. And so I just think, you know, we reached our potential, and we were just playing good football week in, week out. And then we saw last night what can happen, though, in big games if you have a bad quarter.
Coach, I'm curious. We talked all about getting in. Are they going to be in? I want to know. I had a question about the game last night. Did you think about going for 2 at all there at the late game situation? When you scored, you guys decided to tie it up, and then, of course, Clemson gets that, you know, return and they get the kick. Did you think about going for the win?
I did. My first year here, actually, I went for the win at the end of our bowl game against BYU, and it didn't work. But so I'm not scared to do that. I did right before the drive. I knew we were going to get the ball back, and I thought, man, if we scored, I'd go for 2. And quickly I didn't, and here's why. I trust our defense. We had all the momentum. You know, I think usually you go for 2 when you think, man, if this game keeps going, I don't know if we can hang in there. Let's give a chance to end this game on our terms. I felt like the way that game was going, we had just had a 17-point fourth quarter comeback. Offensively, we were clicking, throwing it, running it. Kevin was cooking, as they say. And defensively, we had really shut them down in the second half. You know, they won the first half 24-7. We won the second half 24-7 until that last kick. And so I just felt really confident. We go to overtime, we're going to win this game. And so I wanted to give our kids the chance to keep playing because I felt like we had started to show we were capable of being the better team.
Rhett, you've got Penn State. You have to go to Happy Valley. It's a day game, though. Huge environment. What do you know about Penn State? Their defense has been playing very well all season, but last night they were leaking a little bit. What do you think of the matchup, man?
You know, I need to get into film to give you a better answer, but I mean, got a lot of respect for James. I know Tom Allen, who's their defensive coordinator, well. I know offensively, you know, they're doing a lot of what they were doing at Kansas last year. Very multiple exotic things they do on offense. It's going to be hard to prepare for. Defensively at home, they're going to be a problem. You know, they got a big-time crowd. Never been to Happy Valley. Excited for our kids to get a chance to compete in that kind of a road environment. You know, we got a 10-game road winning streak right now. And so it'd be awesome to see if our guys can continue to travel and play well. It is good to be a noon kick, probably both for weather and crowd. But, you know, man, I think the best thing that this new playoff brings, besides more teams like us getting in, is first-round games on college campuses. I think it's awesome. I know we're having to go on the road, and it's going to be hard to win in that environment, but we're fired up, and we're excited about the challenge to go out and prove that the committee made the right decision.
We also get a lot of new matchups. This will be the first time we see SMU and Penn State since the 70s. So we are going to be treated to a fun game. The head coach of SMU, Rhett Lashlee, joining us here. Thank you so much, Coach.
Appreciate y'all having me on.
Thank you so much, and best of luck to the Mustangs. Let's talk a little bit more about this matchup real quick. You asked him what he thought. I'm going to ask you, what do you think of this matchup for SMU?
You know, that Penn State defense gives me the willies. As far as if I was SMU, that defensive front, as we know, they can get after the quarterback. I mean, we still saw it last night, even in a high-scoring game, the way they're able to get it. I mean, SMU, Kevin Jennings is going to have to get the ball out quicker than what we've seen in the past. I know he relies on his legs quite a bit, trying to extend plays, but I think they just need to get the ball out a little bit faster to have a chance here on the road.
I can't wait to see what Rhett comes up with for an offensive game plan. Against Tom Allen, he said he knows what he does. He likes to bring a lot of pressures, but Rhett Lashlee is one of the more innovative offensive minds. Figures out ways to get the ball into his receivers' hands, and they run deep. When they lost R.J. Maryland, that was their leading receiver. He was a tight end. I was concerned about him, but they just shuttle guys in and out. They've got a lot of really good wide receivers. I think he's going to put some pressure on Penn State's defense. Another exciting first-round matchup, the battle for the state of Indiana between IU and Notre Dame. The head coach of the Fighting Irish will join us next on this program. Marcus Freeman will be here. Stick with us right here on CBS Sports HQ. Notre Dame is in the college football playoff bracket, earning that 7th seed, the right to host Indiana. We were hoping for this matchup, guys, and we officially got it. Let's take a look at where this kind of lands in the bracket. I think our friend Josh Pate was calling these regions, but this is why Notre Dame earned a spot in this college football playoff. That win-loss record, 11-1. And here is where they land in the bracket for the right to face number 2 Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. We have broken down this bracket from so many angles, but I want to zero in on this Notre Dame team. Obviously, been a bit of a difference from what happened in that second game of the season to Northern Illinois. What has this Notre Dame team done to prove that they deserve a spot in this playoff since then?
Well, I'll say this immediately. This has been the best coaching job by Marcus Freeman and his staff since they've been there. Getting them to regroup and refocus after a debilitating loss in week 2, as you said, something that could have really just changed the makeup of the team and their demeanor. And what did they do? They instead came out and just started beating the crud out of everybody, blowing people out. They were refocused. And for the first time in a long time I can remember, no one was talking about Notre Dame. They've kind of flew under the national radar all season. And everybody's going, well, their schedule's so easy. They're just going to cruise in, and then we'll find out when they go to USC on the road at the end of the season. So everybody just wasn't really paying attention. But meanwhile, Notre Dame, I would argue, is playing about as good as anybody, including Oregon, at this point in the season. And the big thing for them is getting to host Indiana, because right now Notre Dame, they went across country to USC, and I thought, you know, maybe this could be an upset for them. Maybe something could happen here. But, man, I love the grit.
I think somebody that
would
agree with you on them playing their best football right now is the head coach of Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, joining us on the show. Coach, if you think back to week 2, unless you try and remove that from your memory, I mean, most of the country wrote you off from there, but your team responded. What are you most proud of this season?
I think there are some things that you learn from that loss that has truly helped us as we've gone through on this journey this season. But, you know, I'm most proud of them to be able to stay focused and really focus on the opportunity at hand. And this team has constantly strived to improve each week. Obviously, we didn't get the outcome we wanted week 2, but I truly believe this team has continuously gotten better and been able to block out the noise, no matter what that noise may have been. It could have been after a loss to Northern Illinois, or as you get closer to the end of the season, you know, the playoffs are approaching. So really proud of the leadership and the ability to just focus on the things that matter.
I think we get caught up so much in just, you know, the roster makeup, and if you have a talented roster, it should just work, right? But you guys bring in Riley Leonard. He's coming off a surgery where he missed some time in the offseason. What about the opportunity for teams to improve? That's what I look at you guys. And you guys had injuries to both left tackles, losing that before the A&M game. You had defensive injuries throughout the season. How much has your team improved, and how much different are they from week 1 almost, even more than the Northern Illinois game, to where they are now?
Yeah, I think that depth is so important. As you've said, we've had multiple game-ending injuries or season-ending injuries, and the team is really had a next man up mentality, and that is credit to the depth and the guys we brought in here over the past few years in terms of recruiting. But we have improved, and we have truly improved from week 1 to week 12. And I think what happened week 1 is that maybe the outcome kind of clouded some of the mistakes that we made. We weren't as good of a team that we needed to be, or maybe we thought we were. And, week 2, it showed. And so, but we constantly improved. The players and the coaches were very intentional on doing the things that it takes to be the best version of ourselves. And here we are. We sit at 11-1.
Coach, Riley Leonard to me is just a gamer. We saw it at Texas A&M earlier in the season. What do you think he's grown the most here throughout this winning streak you've been on?
Yeah, I think it's complete opposite of what you said, right? To become a gamer, you got to prepare the right way. And what I've seen him do is from week 1 to week 2, understand the highs and lows of being the quarterback at Notre Dame and what all that entails being that person. But he's prepared, and he has really stepped up his leadership in the way he's met with our offensive coordinator to make sure they're on the same page. The natural growing pains you have in the first year of a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback, but he's definitely has been more intentional about doing the things that it takes to be a gamer and have success on Saturdays.
Coach, one of my favorite things about the expanded playoff was getting home playoff games, and we're going to have one of maybe the most historic venue in the sport there in South Bend, in a matchup with an in-state team against Indiana. Just your thoughts about what the atmosphere is going to be like, and then the matchup itself.
Yeah, to be a part of the first playoff game at Notre Dame Stadium is going to be something special. We know the atmosphere is going to be crazy. You didn't know who the opponent was going to be, so could the weather be a home field advantage? It's probably not now that you're playing an in-state team, but again, the atmosphere will be an advantage. The crowd, the comfort ability that we have playing in our stadium, it's special, and we are looking forward to this opportunity.
We are looking forward to watching it. Coach, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you guys.
All right, best of luck to Notre Dame. We haven't talked about this enough. Alabama out. Why? Right decision? Wrong decision? I get to ask the tough questions, and the guys get to answer them next. This was our biggest question headed into the day. Would Alabama be in or SMU? Well, we learned the Mustangs are in the college football playoff, and Alabama missing out after worthy, right, Danny, getting in last year. Alabama, though, not in this iteration of the college football playoff. Chip Patterson joins us here to react a little bit more to that. Chip, in your opinion, why do you think Alabama was ultimately left out of this thing?
I think Alabama was left out of this because they were not in the SEC championship game. That is one of my biggest takeaways and one of the biggest lessons I have coming out of this reveal. And that is, therefore, the loss to Oklahoma, because Alabama was sitting in a great position to make it to the conference championship game until they lost as a double-digit favorite in Norman. So in a sense, the bad loss is what cost Alabama. But to me, it is much more about the conference championship game absence, because you look at what else happened in this field according to the final rankings. There was favorable treatment for Texas, the SEC runner-up. There was favorable seeding treatment for Penn State, the runner-up in the Big Ten. And yes, with SMU getting in ahead of Alabama, I would consider that favorable treatment for the ACC runner-up as well. So it hits on two levels for the Crimson Tide. Number one, you've got a bad loss, which ended up hurting you, but it was that loss that bounced you from a chance to go and play for the SEC title, because I believe if Alabama had made it to Atlanta, then they would have made it into the college football playoffs. So knowing that, I think that's the big takeaway, that someone maybe at 1 a.m. in that room was like, guys, we cannot punish conference title game participants or else it will ruin conference title games. And if I'm going to go total CFP and on, I think that everything about preserving conference championship games led to the SMU over Alabama decision.
I just can't believe Chip doesn't sound like he's very sympathetic for Alabama. Alabama, a program that has just never gotten any breaks. No. They don't get the right players. They just, they're always overcoming the odds. You have to feel a little bit bad for them.
You do.
Yeah, I do.
Well, you don't.
No, I don't. So I think it's both of them. Everyone was kind of gifted a bat. We were just talking to Marcus Freeman. That Northern Illinois loss I thought was devastating, and it was going to be a loss that you could not overcome. Everyone's got them. Everybody's got these, but you cannot have two. Yes, you are correct about the fact they were in the SEC championship game, and I do agree with you on that one, that maybe they would not have been penalized, but also the loss against Vanderbilt. Those two losses are what did them in, and for all the hand-wringing and complaining and their record against top 25 teams, it's like, well, what about the losses to 500 teams? And one of them where you got blown out 24-3. I think this is a pretty simple decision for the committee. When you look at those two losses, I think those were what did them in.
And, for Notre Dame, that bad loss came in week 2. For Alabama, that came 2 weeks ago to Oklahoma, where they were not even able to find the end zone. Let's stick in the SEC and find out Chip's best bet. I'm anxiously wanting to hear this one. Chip, what do you got for us?
I've looked at all the first-round games. I've run the Chipalytics, and I think we've got extreme value on Tennessee plus 7.5. Ohio State's weakness, where is it? On the offensive line. Tennessee's strength, where is it? It's on the defensive line. They're going to be taking on a Buckeyes team that is just going to be gripping it so tight because the messaging has been about national title or bust to be able to save a season that seems ruined. Well, Tennessee, I think, comes in playing free. Tennessee comes in playing loose. And what we saw from Nico Iamaleava at the end of that season was some of the most encouraging play that we had seen since they were running up the score on non-conference opponents at the beginning of the season. I think all the pressure is on the Buckeyes playing at home, and I think Tennessee has a great chance not only to just cover this 7 and a hook. I think Tennessee is in a great position to win it outright. Moneyline sprinkle plus 215. Let's send the Vols to the quarterfinals.
All right, you heard it. Chip Patterson picking the Vols to beat Ohio State in the first round.
He's been on fire this year. So,
really?
I mean, it's a good bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where has he been on fire?
On our
this
Cover
podcast?
3, yes, our Locks Pod.
Yes, you should check out the Cover 3 podcast if you do not already. I'm pretty sure you guys have shows every single day, so you can watch now, download. Thank you so much for watching on HQ.